Hey guys, tonight we are going to drift back in time. We're not visiting a battlefield or a king's court, but rather wandering through the sun-drenched marble corridors and dusty olive groves of ancient Greece. We often think of beauty as a blessing, a gift, something to be celebrated. But in the world of the ancient Greeks, being too pretty wasn't just a magnet for compliments. It was a magnet for trouble. Big, often fatal trouble. Frankly, if you were to pop into existence back then with your modern-day good looks, you might not last the first day. A bit of a reality check. I know. Sell before you get comfortable. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop your city and the time in the comments below. It's always a quiet little thrill for me to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Close your eyes for a moment. Feel the air change. It's no longer the cool, conditioned air of your room. It's warm, dry, and carries the faint, sweet scent of wild thyme and the distant, salty promise of the Aegean Sea. The ground beneath your feet is no longer carpet or wood, but sun-baked earth and uneven stone. You are in ancient Greece, and the very first thing you learn here, long before you learn to read or to count, is a fundamental, unshakable truth: beauty is not yours. It's alone. This concept is woven into the fabric of your existence. The stories whispered by your grandmother as she spins wool. The songs sung by traveling bards in the marketplace. The murals painted on the walls of important buildings, they all tell the same story. That striking feature you see when you catch a reflection in a polished bronze mirror, perhaps the startling clarity of your eyes, the perfect symmetry of your face, or the effortless grace in your posture, is not a product of your own genetics. It is a gift, or more accurately, a wish from the gods on Mount Olympus. Your beauty belongs to Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty herself, who might have fashioned your charm with her own hands. Or perhaps it's a nod from Apollo, the god of light and order, who blessed you with a form that reflects his own radiant perfection. It could even be a fleeting touch from Hera, the queen of the gods, though her gifts are often more complicated. This is a core piece of the Greek worldview. The gods are not distant, abstract beings. They are active, emotional, and deeply invested landlords of the human condition. And they are, to put it mildly, incredibly vain. This is why a compliment in ancient Greece feels different. When someone stops and remarks on your appearance, it's a moment of both pride and a quiet, prickling fear. You feel a flush of warmth, yes, but it's followed by a cool shiver. They are not just complimenting you, they are acknowledging a piece of divine artistry you are temporarily wearing. Then you know, deep in your bones, that the artist is listening. To be too proud of this borrowed beauty, to claim it as your own, is an act of hubris, that fatal flaw of excessive pride that brings heroes and commoners alike to their knees. It's like borrowing a priceless sculpture from a museum and telling everyone you carved it yourself. The curator will find out, and they will not be pleased. A fascinating, unslightly strange layer to this is the Greek concept of miasma, or spiritual pollution. If you anger a god, the consequence isn't just a lightning bolt from the sky. It can be a stain, an invisible contamination that clings to you and your family, causing misfortune, sickness, and ruin. Boasting about your God-given beauty could be just the sort of thing to incur miasma. It's not just bad luck, it's a tangible state of being out of favor with the divine, a spiritual stench that others might sense and shy away from. You would then need to undergo complex purification rituals to cleanse yourself, hoping you haven't offended the original lender of your looks too deeply. Now, historians and classicists still debate just how literally the average person on the streets of Athens or Sparta took these divine tales. Was it a literal belief that Aphrodite herself would track your every boast and smite you for your vanity? Or was it more of a complex, metaphorical way to understand the chaotic and often unfair nature of life, a way to explain why a beautiful person might suddenly fall ill, or why their fortunes might turn on a dime. The answer is likely somewhere in the middle. For you, living in this world, it doesn't really matter. The belief is the reality. It shapes how you move, how you speak, how you accept a compliment with a humble nod and a quiet prayer of thanks to the gods, making sure they get the credit. Your beauty is a heavy cloak. It's magnificent. It turns heads. It opens doors. But it's also cumbersome and comes with a long list of care instructions you can't afford to ignore. Every glance of admiration is a reminder that you're being watched, not just by mortals, but by the immortal. This awareness hums beneath the surface of your daily life, a constant, low-frequency vibration of caution. It's a quiet weight in the back of your mind as you prepare to step out of the relative safety of your home into the bustling, judgmental, and watchful world of the city streets. You step through the archway of your family's home, a modest dwelling in a narrow, winding laneway. The sudden brightness makes you blink. The Athenian sun is not gentle, it's a brilliant, almost white light that bounces off the lime-washed walls of the houses, making the shadows sharp and dark. The air is already thick with the sounds of the city waking up. You hear the distant braying of a donkey, the rhythmic clanging of a blacksmith's hammer, the chatter of neighbors calling to one another from their doorways. The path is uneven, paved with large, flat stones worn smooth by generations of sandals and cartwheels. You are on your way to the Agora, the sprawling marketplace that is the chaotic, beating heart of Athens. As you walk, you begin to feel it. It starts as a subtle shift in the atmosphere around you. A potter, his hands caked in wet clay, looks up from his wheel as you pass, his work-addled gaze lingering for a moment too long. A group of older women, gossiping by a public well, fall silent, their eyes following you until you turn a corner. It's not hostile, not yet. It's a mixture of things: curiosity, admiration, and a faint, almost imperceptible hint of appraisal, as if they're evaluating a fine vase or a well-bred horse. This is your reality. Your face, your form, is public property, a landmark in your local neighborhood. This reaction is rooted in a core Greek belief known as kalokagothia, the idea that beauty and goodness are intrinsically linked. The assumption, at least on the surface, is that a beautiful exterior must house a noble and virtuous interior. So those initial glances are often filled with a hopeful expectation. People see you and want to believe you are as good, as kind, as honorable as you are lovely to look at. This is both a blessing and an immense pressure. You are a walking embodiment of a philosophical ideal, and any slip up a sharp word, a moment of impatience, an uncharitable act is not just a personal failing. It's a jarring disappointment, a crack in their worldview. Your ugliness, if you show any, is somehow more offensive than that of a plain person. You reach the edge of the Agora, and the sensory input intensifies. The space opens up, the vast, dusty square teeming with life. Merchants shout their prices for everything from shimmering olive oil in clay amphorae to vibrant spices from the east. Philosophers, their robes dusty and their faces earnest, gather small crowds, debating the nature of virtue. You might even catch a glimpse of a man with a famously unconventional face, Socrates, quizzing some arrogant young nobleman and making him look foolish. But as you navigate the crowds, another, more ancient and potent danger makes itself known: the evil eye. Here's a fashionably weird piece of folk wisdom you've grown up with. Intense admiration, especially when laced with envy, is believed to have a physical power. A stare that is too direct, a compliment that is too effusive, can transfer a curse that mashes ma. It's a sickness of the soul that manifests in the body, causing headaches, dizziness, and a string of bad luck. So, when a stall owner praises your healthy glow, you'll notice he might subtly spit on the ground 3 times right after. It's a bizarre but common practice to ward off the very curse his compliment might have just inflicted. Someone might praise your eyes and then make a fist with their thumb between their index and middle finger, a gesture meant to deflect the negative energy. It's a world where praise and poison are uncomfortably close, where to be seen is to be vulnerable. Historians still argue about the practical, day-to-day reality of this. Could a common person's beauty truly elevate their social standing, or was it an asset largely confined to specific circles for a high-class courtesan? The Hita Hera. Beauty and wit were her trade, her path to influence. For a well-born young man, a handsome appearance could attract a powerful mentor, opening doors to political and military careers. But for you, an ordinary citizen, the benefits are less clear and the risks are more immediate. Your beauty might win you a more advantageous marriage proposal, but it also makes you a target for gossip, for the envy of your peers, and for the unwanted attention of powerful men who might not take no for an answer. Your social currency is volatile, its value fluctuating with every glance you receive. So as you make your way to the fishmonger's stall, you learn to perfect a very specific kind of posture. You walk with your head held high enough to show confidence to keep part of that expected nobility, but with your gaze slightly lowered to project modesty and deflect direct stares. You are performing a delicate dance, a constant negotiation between the ideal you represent and the dangers you face. The sun beats down on your shoulders, and you feel the weight of 1,000 eyes, each one a tiny pinprick of judgment, admiration, or envy. And these are just the mortals. You haven't even begun to worry about the gods. As you go about your errands, you can't shake the feeling of being observed. It's more than just the stares of the merchants and shoppers in the Agra. It's a deeper, more profound sense of being perceived. In your world, this is a very real concern, because if mortal envy can feel like a physical weight, the envy of a god is a universe-crushing force. And when it comes to beauty, one goddess's attention is the most coveted and feared of all Aphrodite. You've been raised on stories about her. She wasn't one of the original 12 Olympians who fought the Titans. According to the poet Hesiod, her birth was far more dramatic. When the Titan Cronus overthrew his father Uranus, he cast his father's severed members into the sea. From the churning, bubbling sea foe, maybe H. Ross, emerged the fully grown goddess of love, duty, and desire, drifting to the shore of Cyprus on a scalloped shell. Her very essence is beauty, so pure and so overwhelming that flowers were said to bloom where she walked. She is not just a beautiful goddess, she is beauty. Everything lovely, from a perfect sunset to the curve of a lover's smile, is a reflection of her. This is why she is so dangerous. She holds the divine patent on beauty. While other gods might appreciate it, Aphrodite owns it. So when a mortal's beauty becomes to celebrate it, when people start whispering that your grace rivals that of the goddess herself, you are not just committing hubris, you are infringing on her copyright. You are, in essence, the divine knockoff, and she is fiercely protective of her brand. You recall the cautionary tales. There's the story of the Smyrnaeans, who made the foolish mistake of building a temple to a local princess named Smyrna, claiming her beauty surpassed Aphrodite's. The goddess's revenge was horrificously creative. She cursed Smyrna with an insatiable passion for her own father. The resulting tragedy was a twisted, gut-wrenching lesson for all of Greece: do not compare a mortal to a goddess. Ever. So when someone compliments you by saying, "You are as beautiful as Aphrodite," you don't blush with pleasure. A cold dread washes over you. You would immediately and vehemently deny it, perhaps making a small offering at her nearest shrine as soon as possible, begging her forgiveness for the fool who spoke such blasphemy. You understand that the goddess's vanity isn't a petty human flaw. It's a fundamental aspect of her divine nature. To challenge, it is to challenge the cosmic order itself. Here's a peculiar little detail about her worship. In some of her temples, particularly in places like Corinth, her priestesses engaged in sacred prostitution. The idea, shockingly foreign to our modern sensibilities, was that this act was a form of worship, a physical embodiment of the divine, untamed power of love and desire that Aphrodite represented. It highlights the raw, often chaotic, and immoral nature of her domain. She is not the goddess of gentle, romantic love, she is the goddess of overwhelming, world-altering passion and irresistible physical attraction. Her power is a force of nature, like a storm or an earthquake, and you do not want to stand in its way. The academic debate on this topic is fascinating. Some historians argue that Aphrodite's jealousy in these myths is a patriarchal tool, a way to control and devalue female beauty by framing it as inherently dangerous and disruptive. It teaches women to be modest and unassuming, lest they provoke divine wrath or, more practically, the wrath of powerful men. Others suggest a more psychological interpretation. These stories are a way for society to grapple with the disruptive power of extraordinary beauty. It can break up families, inspire irrational acts, and sow chaos. Blaming a jealous goddess is a way to make sense of this unpredictable and often destructive force. For you, standing in the Athenian marketplace, these academic distinctions are meaningless. All you know is that your face could be a liability. The more it is praised, the more it is noticed, the greater the risk that your file will land on the desk of the most powerful and most notoriously insecure CEO of Beauty Inc. You find yourself subtly trying to downplay your appearance. Perhaps you pull your himadion, your cloak, a little more closely around your head. You might deliberately scuff a bit of dust onto your cheek, anything to dim the shine, to avoid catching the eye of the one being whose attention could turn your life into a cautionary tale whispered for generations to come. Your beauty, this gift from the gods, now feels less like a gift and more like a ticking time bomb, and you're not entirely sure you know how to diffuse it. As you try to make yourself smaller in the crowd, your mind naturally drifts to the ultimate cautionary tale, the one every Greek child knows. It's the story of a beauty so profound, so devastating. It didn't just ruin a life or a family. It leveled a city. You think of Helen. Before she was Helen of Troy, she was Helen of Sparta. And her story began with the same dangerous theme: divine interference. Her mother was Leda, the queen of Sparta. Her father, however, was none other than Zeus, the king of the gods, who visited Leda in the form of a magnificent swan. From this strange union, Leda laid 2 eggs. From one hatched the mortal children Castor and Kilt and Demis. From the other hatched the semi-divine Pollux and Helen. From her airy birth, Helen was set apart. She wasn't just beautiful, she was the daughter of the king of the gods. Her beauty was literally god tier. News of her unparalleled loveliness spread like wildfire across the Greek world. By the time she was a young girl, she was already so famous that the hero Theseus, the same guy who famously navigated the labyrinth, kidnapped her, intending to wait until she was of age to marry her. She was eventually rescued by her brothers, but the incident was a stark omen. Her face was a prize, an object to be possessed. When she came of marriageable age, the situation escalated into a political crisis. The most powerful kings and princes from all over Greece descended upon Sparta, each one vying for her hand. Her stepfather, King Tyndareus, was in an impossible position. If he chose one suitor, all the others would surely unite against him. The whole of Greece was a powder keg, and Helen's hand was the spark. It was the clever Odysseus, not a top contender for her hand, but certainly the sharpest mind in the room, who came up with a solution. He proposed that, before the choice was made, all the suitors should swear a solemn oath to accept Helen's future husband, whoever he might be, and to defend that marriage with their own armies if anyone ever threatened it. Desperate, they all agreed. Helen was then given to Menelaus, the brother of the powerful King Agamemnon, and for a time there was peace. Then came the golden apple. At a divine wedding, Theris, the goddess of discord, tossed an apple inscribed to the fairest among the goddesses. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite all claimed it. Zeus, wisely wanting no part in this dispute, appointed a mortal to judge Paris. the handsome, but rather naive Prince of Troy. Each goddess offered him a bribe. Hera offered power over continents. Athena offered wisdom and victory in battle. But Aphrodite offered him the most beautiful mortal woman in the world, Helen. Paris, led by his heart rather than his head, chose Aphrodite. This is a weird little detail that often gets glossed over. Helen had no say in any of this. The degree of her complicity in leaving with Paris is one of the great, unresolved debates in all of literature. Was she kidnapped? Did she fall madly in love? A victim of Aphrodite's irresistible power? Did she go willingly? Tired of her life in Sparta, the ancient sources themselves are conflicted. The poet Homer portrays her with a certain sympathy as a woman trapped by fated divine winds. The tragedian Eurypylus, however, often depicts her more critically as a vain and selfish woman who brought ruin upon two civilizations. This very ambiguity is what makes her so endlessly fascinating. She is both a victim of her own beauty and an agent of its destructive power. The result, as you know, was the oath of Tyndareus being invoked. When Paris took Helen to Troy, Menelaus called upon all her former suitors. Bound by their sworn promise, they assembled the largest army the world had ever seen and sailed for Troy. For 10 long years, the Greeks and Trojans fought and died beneath the city walls, all because of a face. So, when you see a man's head turn as you walk by, when you hear that whispered compliment, the story of Helen is the shadow that falls across your heart. It's the ultimate proof of your culture's deepest anxiety that beauty, in its most extreme form, is not a constructive force. It doesn't build things. It doesn't create peace. It is a catalyst for chaos. A beautiful, glittering lure that leads men and gods alike into their worst impulses. Helen's face was a blessing to the world. It was a weapon of mass destruction, and the fallout was still being sifted through generations later. The story of Helen is one of external chaos, of armies clashing on a dusty plain. But there's another kind of danger that beauty can invite, a more internal, psychological torment. Your thoughts turn to a different figure from the Trojan War, a woman whose beauty also attracted a god, but whose curse was one of maddening futility. You think of Cassandra. She was a princess of Troy, daughter of King Priam, and by all accounts, exceptionally beautiful. Her loveliness caught the eye of the most radiant of the gods, Apollo, the god of music, poetry, prophecy, and the sun itself. He was accustomed to getting what he wanted, be it from mortals or fellow deities. He desired Cassandra, and in the divinic army of Olympus, this meant he would have her. To sweeten the deal, he offered her a gift worthy of his domain, the power of prophecy. He would make her a seer, able to read the future in the rustle of leaves, the flight of birds, and the whispers of the wind. Cassandra, in a moment of either incredible bravery or profound foolishness, accepted the gift, but then rejected the god. She took the power but refused to sleep with him. Apollo was stunned. A mortal had spurned him. His divine pride was wounded, and for a god, a wounded ego demands retribution. But the gods have rules, even if they often bend them. He could not take back the gift of prophecy he had freely given. It was already part of her. So, he devised a far more cruel and delicate revenge. He leaned in as if to kiss her, and instead, he spat in her mouth, adding a tiny, devastating rider to his original gift. She would always see the future with perfect clarity, that no one would ever believe her. Imagine that. You become a vessel for the absolute truth of what is to come. You see the Trojan horse for what it is, not a gift, that a wooden belly full of death. You plead with your family, with the leaders of your city, telling them you can hear the clang of armor inside, that you can smell the sweat of the Greek soldiers hidden within. You scream, you weep, you tear at your clothes, pointing at this monument to their own destruction, and they look at you with a mixture of pity and annoyance. They see your beautiful, frantic face, hear your desperate, shrieking voice, and they dismiss you as hysterical. Poor Cassandra, they murmur. The stress of the war has unhinged her. Your divine gift, filtered through the lens of your beauty, is perceived as madness. This is the insidious nature of Apollo's curse. Her beauty, which had attracted the god in the first place, now worked against her. In a world where women were already considered more emotional and less rational than men, a beautiful woman in the grip of a divine vision wasn't seen as a prophet. She was seen as a spectacle. One of the more bizarre and lesser known details of her myth involves her connection to snakes. In some versions, it's said that, as a child, she fell asleep in the temple of Apollo, and the temple serpents licked her ears, which is what first opened them to the divine voice. This connection to snakes and to ecstatic prophecy delivered in a state of frenzied trance places her in a tradition of female seers that made the male-dominated Greek society deeply uncomfortable. They preferred their prophets to be calm, measured old men interpreting bird entrails, not wild-eyed young women channeling a god. The academic world still tussles with Cassandra's legacy. Was her story a cautionary tale about defying the gods, or was it, as some feminist scholars argue, a powerful metaphor for the silencing of women's voices? She represents the tragic figure who speaks the truth to power, but whose identity as a woman, as someone beautiful and therefore assumed to be flighty, discredits her message. She is the ultimate gaslit woman, whose accurate perception of reality is systematically denied until it's too late. You see her story play out in miniature all the time. A woman's valid concern dismissed as over-emotional, her insight ignored in favor of a man's confident bluster. Cassandra's fate is the logical, tragic extreme of this tendency. She lived in a state of constant, screaming frustration, her mind a pristine mirror of the future, while everyone around her chose to see only their own reflection in her beautiful, desperate eyes. Her gift was not a gift at all, it was a prison. A solitary confinement cell where the only other inmate was the horrifying, oncoming truth. She saw the flames that would consume her home. She saw the blade that would end her life, and all she could do was watch it happen, her warnings dissolving into the air like smoke. The stories of Helen and Cassandra are about the grand, sweeping tragedies caused by beauty. They involve wars and the fall of nations. But as you continue your walk home, the sun now lower in the sky, you think about a story that feels more intimate, more personal. It's a fairy tale, really. One that your mother might have told you. It's the story of Psyche, and it offers a slightly different, though no less dangerous, lesson. Even if a god genuinely falls in love with you, his family can still be a nightmare. Psyche was a mortal princess, the youngest of 3 sisters. Her 2 older sisters were perfectly lovely, but Psyche's beauty was of a different order entirely. It was so extraordinary, so breathtaking, that people began to neglect their worship of Aphrodite. Why travel to the temples in Paphos or Cythera? They reasoned. When they could simply gaze upon this perfect princess in their own kingdom, they began to offer to Psyche the honors due to the goddess of beauty herself. You can probably guess how this went down on Mount Olympus. Aphrodite was, to put it mildly, incandescent with rage. This wasn't just an insult, it was a threat to her very relevance. Consumed by jealousy, she called upon her son, the mischievous and often cruel god of desire. You also might know him by his Roman name, Cupid. His arrows were irresistible. One prick could make gods and mortals fall helplessly in love with the first person they saw. Aphrodite's instructions were simple and vicious. Go to this upstart, this Psyche. Use your power and make her fall in love with the most vile, wretched, and contemptible creature you can find. Eros, ever the obedient son, flew down to earth to do his mother's bidding. He found Psyche asleep in her chambers, a vision of serene loveliness. As he prepared to carry out his orders, he fumbled, pricking himself with his own arrow. The moment he did, his eyes fell upon the sleeping princess. Instantly, he was overcome with a love so deep and powerful, it shook his divine being to the core. He had become a victim of his own weapon. This is where the story gets strange. Psyche's parents, meanwhile, were distressed. Despite her beauty, no one came to ask for her hand in marriage. Men would admire her, worship her from afar, but none dared to court her. Fearing they had angered the gods, they consulted the oracle of Apollo. The oracle's prophecy was terrifying. Psyche was destined not for a mortal husband, but for a monster, a creature so fierce that even the gods feared him. She was to be dressed in funeral clothes, taken to the top of a mountain, and left there to meet her fate. This monster, of course, was the lovely Sykiros, working behind the scenes. After her weeping family abandoned her, Psyche was gently lifted by Zephyros, the west wind, and carried to a magical palace, a place of impossible beauty and luxury. Every night, in total darkness, her mysterious husband would come to her. He was a kind and tender lover, but he made one strict rule: she must never, ever try to see his face. For a time, she was happy, but her jealous sisters, visiting her in her opulent prison, planted seeds of doubt. They convinced her that her husband must truly be a hideous monster, and that she needed to see him to know the truth. The historical debate around this story often centers on its origins. Is it a purely Greek tale, or does it have roots in older, Near Eastern folklore? The most complete version we have comes from the Roman writer Apuleius in his book The Golden Ass, but scholars believe the story is much older. It fits the classic Beauty and the Beast archetype, exploring themes of trust, curiosity, and the idea that true love must look beyond physical appearance. For the Greeks, it was also a story about the soul's journey. The word psyche in Greek means soul. Driven by her sister's poison, Psyche betrayed her husband's trust. One night, she lit an oil lamp to look upon his face while he slept. What she saw was not a monster, but the most beautiful being she could ever imagine, the god Eros himself. Startled, she dripped hot oil from the lamp onto his shoulder. He awoke, betrayed and heartbroken, and flew away, the magical palace vanishing around her. Now alone and despairing, Psyche was forced to wander the earth, searching for her lost love. And this is when she came face to face with the true dangerous corned goddess who now had a very personal grudge. Aphrodite, furious that her son had not only disobeyed her but had fallen for her rival, subjected Psyche to a series of impossible, cruel tasks. It was the ultimate test, designed by a divine mother-in-law who despised her. Psyche's beauty had won her a god's love, but it had also made her a direct enemy of the most powerful force in that god's life. Her ordeal was just beginning. As the shadows lengthen, your path takes you past a small, unassuming temple. It's not one of the grand structures on the Acropolis, but a humbler shrine. It reminds you of another story, one that twists the narrative of beauty and danger in a new direction. In the stories of Helen and Psyche, beauty was the catalyst, but in the story of Medusa, beauty was an innocent bystander, caught in the crossfire of divine egos. Her tale is a chilling reminder that sometimes your only crime is being in the wrong place at the wrong time, while wearing the wrong face. Before she was a monster, Medusa was a human, not a princess or a demigoddess, but a young woman, one of 3 sisters known as the Gorgons. Unlike her 2 sisters, Thestheno and Euryale, who were immortal from birth, Medusa was born immortal, and she was stunningly beautiful. By all accounts, her most celebrated feature was her hair long, lustrous, and radiant. She was so devout that she chose to become a priestess in the temple of Athena, the virgin goddess of wisdom, crafts, and warfare. This was a life of quiet piety. As a priestess of Athena, Medusa would have taken a vow of celibacy, dedicating her life to the service of her patron goddess. Her beauty, in this context, was not a tool for seduction or a source of vanity, but an offering. It was a reflection of the purity and order that Athena herself represented. For a time, it seemed she had found a way to possess beauty without courting disaster. She had placed it in the service of a powerful goddess, sheltering it within the sacred walls of a temple. But no wall is high enough to keep out the desires of the gods. The sea god, Poseidon, one of the most powerful and volatile of the Olympians, saw Medusa and was consumed by lust. Poseidon and Athena had a long-standing rivalry. They had once competed for the patronage of the city of Athens itself, a contest Athena won by offering the city the olive tree. Poseidon was a sore loser, and he carried a grudge. What happened next is a point of contention in the ancient texts, a moment of brutal ambiguity. In most versions, Poseidon, seeing Medusa in Athena's temple, did not woo her or ask for her consent. He forced himself upon her, violating her on the cold marble floor of the temple. He defiled not only Medusa, but the sacred space of his rival, Athena. It was an act of dominance, a power play between two gods, and Medusa was the pawn. When Athena discovered what had happened, her rage was immense. But her rage was not directed at Poseidon, her powerful uncle and fellow Olympian. To attack him directly would be to invite a catastrophic conflict among the gods. So, she turned her wrath upon the victim. Athena punished Medusa. The logic, as twisted as it sounds, was that Medusa had allowed the temple to be defiled. It was her beauty that had lured Poseidon in. She was held responsible for the crime committed against her. Here's a small, often overlooked detail that makes the story even more tragic. Some later Roman authors, like Ovid, suggest that Medusa was proud of her hair, that she had perhaps boasted about it, even comparing it to Athena's. This detail, likely a later addition, tries to place a tiny sliver of blame on Medusa, a hint of hubris to justify the horror of her punishment, but in the earlier Greek traditions, she is largely blameless. The punishment was monstrous. Athena transformed Medusa's beautiful hair, the very feature that had attracted Poseidon's gaze, into a writhing nest of venomous snakes. Her lovely face was contorted into a hideous visage, so terrifying that anyone who looked directly at her would be turned to stone. She was banished to a remote island, cursed and reviled, her name becoming synonymous with terror. Athena had effectively weaponized Medusa, turning her into a living nightmare, a permanent monument to the defilement of her temple. Historians and mythologists have long debated the meaning of this myth. Is it another stark example of victim blaming in a patriarchal society, where a woman's assault is blamed on her own attractiveness, or is it a more complex psychological allegory about trauma some modern interpretations view? The transformation into the Gorgon as a symbol of female rage, a protective ugliness and power born from an unspeakable violation. Medusa, by becoming monstrous, ensures she can never be a victim again. You shiver, looking at the temple. Medusa's story is perhaps the most terrifying of all. Helen's beauty launched tour. Psyche's beauty earned a goddess enmity, but Medusa's beauty simply put her in the path of a divine feud. She did nothing wrong. She was pious, she was devout, she was chaste, and yet her beauty was the canvas upon which two powerful deities settled a score. It teaches you the most frightening lesson of all sometimes. It doesn't matter how humble or careful you are. If you are beautiful, you are visible. And if you are visible to the gods, you are a potential piece in their ruthless, cosmic games. You move away from the temple, seeking the quieter, less crowded lanes on your way home. The setting sun casts long, distorted shadows that seem to dance and drift, just like the snakes on Medusa's head. Your mind, still unsettled, summons another figure, this time a young man. His story isn't one of divine cruelty or epic wars, but of a danger that is quieter, more insidious, and comes entirely from within. It's the story of Narcissus, and it's a warning against the intoxicating poison of self-love. Narcissus was a youth from the Spii in Boeotia, and he was, by all accounts, heartbreakingly beautiful. He was the son of a river god and a nymph, inheriting a fluid, ethereal kind of grace. From the moment of his birth, his beauty was the talk of the region, worried about his future. His mother Liriope went to the blind seer Tiresias, the same prophet famous for his role in the Oedipus myth, and asked how long her son would live. Tiresias gave a cryptic reply: he will live to a ripe old age, as long as he never knows himself. It was a strange prophecy, one that no one at the time could fully comprehend. As Narcissus grew, his beauty intensified. He was pursued relentlessly by would-be lovers, both men and women, nymphs and mortals. But he was cold, arrogant, and utterly disdainful of their affections. He walked through the world encased in a bubble of his own perfection, treating the love of others as an annoying distraction. He broke hearts casually, with a kind of detached cruelty. His most famous victim was a mountain nymph named Echo. She had been cursed by Hero for being too talkative, her punishment being that she could no longer speak her own thoughts, only repeat the last few words she heard. She fell desperately in love with Narcissus, shadowing him through the woods, her heart aching with words she could not form. One day, Narcissus, sensing he was being followed, called out, "Who's there?" Echo could only reply, "Who's there?" A frustrating back and forth ensued until he finally called, "Let us meet together." Overjoyed, Echo stepped out from behind the trees, her arms open, and repeated, "Let us meet together." Narcissus, seeing her, recoiled in disgust. "I would die before I give you power over me," he spat. All a heartbroken Echo could whisper in reply was, "I give you power over me." She fled in shame and faded away, until nothing was left of her but her voice, which still haunts lonely places. This act of supreme cruelty was the final straw. Nemesis, the goddess of retribution and divine vengeance, heard the prayers of all the lovers Narcissus had spurned. She decided it was time for Tiresias's prophecy to be fulfilled. She led the arrogant youth to a secluded, pristine pool of water, its surface as smooth and clear as polished silver. Tired and thirsty from a hunt, Narcissus knelt down to drink, and for the first time, he saw it. A face of such perfect, captivating beauty stared back at him from the water's surface. He was mesmerized. He didn't realize he was looking at his own reflection. He thought it was a water spirit, the most beautiful creature he had ever seen. He fell instantly, hopelessly, and tragically in love. This is a bizarre detail often lost in modern retellings. He didn't know it was himself. The tragedy isn't just vanity, it's a fundamental lack of self-awareness. He tried to kiss the beautiful face, but it dissolved at his touch. He spoke to it, pleaded with it, but it only mimicked his movements in silence. He was trapped. He could not possess the object of his desire, nor could he bear to leave it. He forgot to eat, to drink, to sleep. He was completely consumed by this impossible love, finally feeling the same burning, unrequited passion that he had inflicted on so many others. He was experiencing the pain Echo felt, his own cruelty reflected back at him. The academic interpretation of Narcissus has evolved significantly over time. For the Greeks, it was a straightforward moral tale about the dangers of arrogance and the importance of empathy. It's a myth that reinforces social cohesion. Read others with respect, or Nemesis will ensure you get a taste of your own medicine. In the 20th century, of course, Sigmund Freud famously adopted the term narcissism to describe his psychological condition of excessive self-involvement. But the original myth is less about a personality disorder and more about a divine punishment that fits the crime with poetic precision. The question of whether Narcissus is a victim of his own beauty or his own character is a debate that still echoes in scholarly circles. Eventually, Narcissus wasted away by the side of the pool, his body withering until he finally died of heartbreak and starvation, his last words to the reflection being farewell. "Dear boy, beloved in vain." When the nymphs came to collect his body for a funeral, they found nothing. In his place grew a single, beautiful flower with a nodding, whitened yellow head, which forever after would bear his name, the Narcissus. His beauty, which he had hoarded so jealously, ended up giving itself to the world only in his death. A silent, beautiful warning growing by the water's edge. The story of Narcissus is a lonely one, the tragedy of one, but as you finally reach the street where you live, the last rays of sunlight painting the sky in shades of orange and deep purple, your mind conjures a story that's far more crowded. It's a tale of a beauty so exceptional, it couldn't be contained by just one admirer, not even a divine one. It's the story of Adonis, the beautiful boy who found himself at the center of a love triangle between two of the most powerful goddesses on Olympus. His fate is a stark illustration that being the object of divine affection isn't a blessing, it's a political nightmare. Adonis' birth was, like so many others in these stories, steeped in tragedy and divine meddling. He was the son of Moray, the same princess who, cursed by Aphrodite, had fallen in love with her own father. When her father discovered the deception, he pursued her with a sword. The gods, taking pity, transformed her into a myrtle tree. For 9 months, the tree grew until its bark split open and the infant Adonis emerged. He was, from his first breath, impossibly beautiful. Aphrodite herself, the goddess of beauty, stumbled upon the newborn. She was so taken by his perfection that she wanted to keep him safe, to hide him away from the prying eyes of the other gods. She scooped him up, placed him in a chest, and took him to the one place she thought he would be secure, the underworld. She entrusted the chest and its precious contents to Persephone, the queen of the dead, Hades' reluctant but powerful wife. This was Aphrodite's first mistake. She underestimated Persephone. The queen of the underworld was not some mere babysitter. She was a formidable deity in her own right, ruling over a vast and shadowy kingdom. Curious, she opened the chest. When she saw the beautiful child, she was just as captivated as Aphrodite had been. She refused to give him back. Suddenly, Aphrodite's secret treasure had become a point of contention between two major goddesses. The argument escalated until it had to be brought before Zeus for arbitration. Zeus, once again wanting no part in a dispute between powerful goddesses, a recurring theme for him, delegated the decision. In some versions, he passes it to the muse Calliope. The ruling was a classic case of divine compromise, an attempt at shared custody. Adonis would spend 1/3 of the year with Persephone in the underworld, 1/3 of the year with Aphrodite on earth, and the final third was his own, to do with as he pleased. Here's the interesting, unslightly cheeky detail: Adonis, given the choice, always chose to spend his free third of the year with Aphrodite. This, of course, delighted the goddess of love and further infuriated Persephone, keeping the tension between them simmering. For a time, this arrangement worked. When Adonis was on earth, he and Aphrodite were inseparable. She was utterly besotted with him. The goddess of love, who inspired passion in all others, was now its captive. She neglected her duties, her temples, even her appearance, caring only for following this beautiful mortal boy. They spent their days hunting in the forests, a classic Greek pastime for aristocratic youth. But Aphrodite, a goddess, had a premonition. She feared for his safety. Hunt the small things, she begged him, the deer and the rabbits, but do not hunt the beasts that are brave and fight back. Like the lions, the bears, and the boars, your courage will be the end of you, then the end of me. This is where the debate among mythographers gets interesting. Was Adonis's death fated from the start as a consequence of his cursed birth, or was it a direct result of the divine love triangle? Some versions of the myth strongly imply that the wild boar that ultimately kills Adonis wasn't just any boar. It was sent by one of Aphrodite's jealous lovers, perhaps her official partner, the cuckolded, perpetually angry god of war. Ours, in other versions, it was sent by Artemis, the virgin goddess of the hunt, who was offended that Aphrodite and Adonis were racing through her sacred forests. And in still other versions, it was a final, vengeful act from a bitter Persephone, ensuring that if she couldn't have him, no one could. Regardless of who sent it, the boar came. Adonis, ignoring Aphrodite's warnings in a display of youthful recklessness, spared the great beast, but the wound wasn't fatal. The enraged boar turned, gored him in the thigh with its massive tusks, and the beautiful boy fell, bleeding out among the wildflowers. Aphrodite heard his cries and rushed to his side, but she was too late. Cradling his dying body, her tears mingled with his blood on the earth. From his blood, the reed anemone flower sprang forth beautiful, but fragile and short-lived. Just like him, from her tears came the white rose, forever stained red by the tragedy. She had tried to possess and protect this perfect beauty, but in doing so, she had placed him at the nexus of so many divine jealousies that his death became almost inevitable. His life was not his own, it was a timetable dictated by goddesses, and his death was the tragic, bloody result of their eternal rivalry. The stories of gods and myths feel distant, like shimmering heat hazes on the horizon, but the danger of being too beautiful, too charismatic, was not confined to the world of divine fantasy. It walked the very streets you now read, in the form of flesh and blood people, and no one in Athens embodied the intoxicating power and immense peril of mortal charm more than a man named Alcibiades. As you picture him, you see a figure who seems to have stepped directly out of a myth, born into one of Athens' wealthiest and most aristocratic families. Alcibiades was blessed with an almost shocking degree of physical beauty, but it wasn't just his face. He had an electric charisma, a razor-sharp wit, and a magnetic personality that drew people to him like moths to a torch. He was the golden boy of Athens, and he knew it. He was also a student and close associate of Socrates, which lent him an air of intellectual credibility to go along with his stunning looks and vast wealth. From a young age, he treated the city of Athens as his personal playground. He was famous for his extravagance, his wild parties, and his complete disregard for convention. There's a famous story of him buying a ridiculously expensive dog, solely so he could cut off its beautiful tail. When his friends asked why he would mutilate such a fine animal, he coolly replied, "So that the Athenians will talk about this, and leave me alone about other things I have done." He understood, instinctively, how to manipulate public opinion, using his charm and audacity as both a sword and a shield. His beauty was a political tool. In the Athenian assembly, where persuasive speech was everything, his appearance gave him an immediate advantage. People wanted to listen to him. They wanted to agree with him. His famous lisp, which would have been a defect in a lesser man, was considered an endearing quirk in the handsome Alcibiades. He used this influence to advocate for one of the most ambitious and ultimately disastrous military campaigns in Athenian history, the Sicilian expedition. He painted a glorious picture of conquest and riches, and the assembly, mesmerized by his vision and his confidence, voted overwhelmingly in favor. He was appointed one of the generals to lead the expedition. This is where his beauty started to work against him. The very qualities that made him so popular also made him deeply suspect. The Athenian democracy was profoundly paranoid about the rise of a potential tyrant. A man as popular, as wealthy, and as magnetically charming as Alcibiades looked dangerously like someone who might overthrow the government. His arrogance didn't help. He lived like a king, flouting social norms and acting as if the rules didn't apply to him. People were charmed by him, but they also feared him. Was his ambition for Athens, or for himself? Just as the fleet was preparing to sail for Sicily, a great scandal erupted in Athens. One night, a number of Hermes stone pillars topped with the head of the god Hermes that were placed at crossroads and outside homes as sacred guardians were mutilated across the city. It was an act of shocking impiety, seen as a terrible omen. At the same time, Alcibiades was accused of profaning the Eleusinian mysteries, one of Greece's most sacred religious rituals, by performing a parody of them at a private party. Here is a strange detail that speaks to the power of his public image. His enemies wanted to put him on trial immediately, but Alcibiades, standing before the very soldiers who adored him, demanded a swift hearing before they set sail, knowing he'd likely be acquitted. His opponents, fearing his popularity with the army, cleverly argued to postpone the trial until after the campaign. Their plan was to let him leave, and then build the case against him in his absence. It worked. The academic debate rages to this day. Was Alcibiades actually guilty of these charges, or were they politically motivated smears, fabricated by his rivals to remove him from power at a critical moment? The evidence is purely circumstantial. His reputation for wild, impious behavior made the accusations plausible. That there was no concrete proof, it remains one of ancient history's great unsolved mysteries. The result was catastrophic. Alcibiades sailed for Sicily, but soon after, a ship arrived from Athens to arrest him and bring him back for trial. Knowing he would be condemned in a city now turned against him, Alcibiades jumped ship. But he didn't just go into exile. In a stunning act of betrayal, he defected to Sparta, Athens' mortal enemy. He gave the Spartans crucial advice on how to defeat his own city, contributing directly to the utter annihilation of the Sicilian expedition, a disaster that cost Athens thousands of lives and crippled its power. Alcibiades' story is a purely human tragedy. His beauty and charisma gave him almost limitless potential, but his arrogance and lack of moderation, his hubris, turned that potential into a destructive force. He was adored and reviled, a hero and a traitor. The people of Athens could never decide if they loved him more than they feared him. And, in the end, that potent, unstable mixture of emotions brought ruin to him and to the city that both created and destroyed him. The story of Alcibiades, a man whose sheer force of personality became a perceived threat to the state, brings to mind a uniquely Athenian invention. It's a civic tool that seems bizarre, almost comical, to us today, but it was deadly serious to the people of your time. It was a way for the democracy to protect itself from individuals who grew too powerful, too popular, or, frankly, too prominent for anyone's comfort. This fascinating and slightly terrifying process was called ostracism. Imagine this once a year. If the assembly decided it was necessary, the citizens of Athens would be called to the agora for a special kind of vote. There were no candidates, no speeches, no campaigns. Each citizen was simply given a shard of broken pottery, called an oestrakon. On this shard, if they so chose, they could scratch the name of any individual they believed had become a threat to the city. A man whose ambition was too naked, a general whose victories made him too popular, a politician whose influence seemed to be bordering on tyrannical, or maybe, just maybe, a man who was just too handsome, too charismatic, and too widely admired for his own good. Officials would collect these thousands of pottery shards and painstakingly count them. There was a quorum required, a minimum of 6. Zero votes had to be cast for the result to be valid. If that number was reached, the winner, the person whose name appeared on the most ostraka, was given 10 days to pack their bags and get out. They were exiled from Athens for 10 years. Their property was not confiscated, their family was not harmed, and they were not considered criminals. It wasn't a punishment for a crime committed, but rather, as the Athenians saw it, a political quarantine, a preemptive strike against the potential for tyranny. You can feel the strange, quiet tension of such a day, walking into the agora, holding that rough piece of clay in your hand, feeling its weight. Who do you vote for? Do you vote for the brilliant but arrogant General Themistocles, who saved Greece from the Persians but now struts around the city like he owns it? Do you vote for Aristides, a man so famous for his fairness that he was nicknamed the Just, precisely because, as one story goes, a fellow citizen was tired of hearing him called that? Or do you vote for someone whose only crime is being universally liked, whose good looks and easy charm seem to be bewitching the city a little too much? This is where beauty becomes a tangible political liability. In a direct democracy pathologically suspicious of individual power, being too much of anything was dangerous. Too rich, too smart, too successful, and yes, too beautiful. A man like Alcibiades, before his great betrayal, was the perfect candidate for ostracism. His charm was seen not just as a personal rebuke, but as a form of non-rational persuasion, a way to bypass the logical arguments of debate and appeal directly to the emotions of the crowd. To the pragmatic, suspicious Athenian voter, that was a dangerous superpower. Ostracism was the kryptonite. A weirdly specific detail about the process is the ostraka themselves. Archaeologists have unearthed thousands of these pottery shards in Athens. They are essentially the scrap paper of the ancient world. Sometimes, you can see multiple shards with the same name, all written in the same handwriting, suggesting that political rivals might have mass-produced them and handed them out to illiterate citizens to help them vote. It was a democratic tool that was, ironically, susceptible to manipulation. The academic world has long been fascinated by ostracism. Was it a brilliant democratic safety valve that successfully prevented tyranny for almost a century, or was it a brutal tool of political infighting, a way for factions to temporarily eliminate their rivals? Historians like David Constant have argued that it was often used as a way to resolve intractable policy disputes by simply removing one of the key proponents from the equation for a decade. It's a debate about whether this was high-minded political theory in action or just good old-fashioned political mudslinging with pottery. For you, the system is a constant, humming reminder of the precariances of public life. It means that success must be tempered with humility. It means that popularity is a double-edged sword. You could be the hero of the city one year and be scratching your name in the dust outside the city walls the next. The will of the people was a fickle and powerful god, and the ostraka were its tea leaves. For someone whose natural gifts, be it beauty, charisma, or talent, made them stand out, it meant they had to constantly look over their shoulder. The same crowd that cheered your name today could be quietly scratching it onto a piece of pottery tomorrow. The fear of ostracism was a political one, a danger for men in the public sphere, but for women, whose lives were largely lived in the private domain, the courtroom could become a terrifying public stage, and in that arena, beauty could be the most powerful piece of evidence for either the prosecution or the defense. This brings you to the story of a woman named Phryne, a tale that culminates in what is possibly the most dramatic and controversial legal defense in ancient history. Phryne was not her real name, it was a nickname meaning toad, likely a cruel joke about her supposed yellowish complexion when she was a girl. Her given name was Menzorid. She was a hetaira, a specific class of woman in Athenian society. A hetaira was not just a common prostitute. She was a highly educated companion, a courtesan skilled in music, conversation, and the arts. These women were the exceptions to the rule of female seclusion in Athens, while respectable wives and daughters were kept cloistered at home. Hetaira could attend the all-male drinking parties known as symposia, engaging with the most powerful philosophers, artists, and politicians of the day. They were women who lived in the public eye, and their chief assets were their wit, their intellect, and, of course, their beauty. Phryne was legendary for all three. She was said to be the muse and lover of the great sculptor Praxiteles, who supposedly used her as the model for his revolutionary statue, the Aphrodite of K and Idos. This was the first major work of Greek art to depict the goddess of beauty completely nude, and it was a sensation, scandalous and revered in equal measure. Phryne's name was therefore inextricably linked with the divine form of Aphrodite herself. Her success, fame, and immense wealth, however, bred resentment. She was put on trial, facing a capital charge impedi. The specific accusation was that she had profaned the Eleusinian mysteries, the same charge leveled against Alcibiades. The prosecution was led by one of her spurned lovers, a man named Eurystheus, who painted her as a corrupting influence on the men of Athens, a woman whose arrogance and immoral lifestyle were an affront to the gods. Given the Athenian anxiety around impotence, her life was in very real danger. Her defense was handled by the orator Hyperides, who was also one of her lovers. The trial took place before the Areopagus, the ancient high court of Athens. Hyperides made his arguments, but he could see that the stern, impassive faces of the judges were unmoved. They were prepared to convict her. The prosecution's narrative of a dangerous, hybristic woman was winning. Desperate, Hyperides resorted to a defense that would be talked about for centuries. He brought Phryne to the center of the court. Then, in a moment of pure theater, he either tore or had her strip off her robes, exposing her bare chest to the judges. He didn't offer a logical argument. He didn't cite a legal precedent. He made a visual one. He asked the judges to gaze upon her form. How, he argued, could they condemn to death a body so perfect, a vessel that had served as the model for the goddess of beauty herself? To do so would be its own kind of impity. He wasn't asking them to judge a woman, he was asking them to judge beauty itself. Here's the slightly weird and uncomfortable detail. According to the writer Athenaeus, who recounts the story, the judges were overcome by a superstitious fear. They were not just swayed by her beauty in an erotic sense, they were genuinely awestruck, seeing her as a sacred representative of Aphrodite. They felt it would be blasphemous to destroy something so divine. They voted to acquit her. The historical accuracy of this specific moment is, of course, a matter of intense scholarly debate. Is it a true account, or is it a sensationalized anecdote that grew over time? A story too good not to be true. Some historians suggest it's an exaggeration. That Hyperides' speech was simply very moving, and he may have gestured towards Phryne's beauty in a metaphorical sense. Others believe it happened exactly as described, arguing that it perfectly encapsulates the Greek belief in the physical manifestation of the divine. The line between a beautiful woman and a goddess could become dangerously blurred. Whatever the truth, the story of Phryne's trial reveals a deep-seated ambiguity in the Greek psyche. On one hand, her beauty and public persona were the very reasons she was on trial, seen as evidence of her corrupting influence and arrogance. The prosecution used her beauty against her. On the other hand, that same beauty, when revealed in its most vulnerable and dramatic form, became her salvation. It was both the poison and the antidote. It showed that in a court of law, where logic and evidence were meant to reign supreme, a sudden, overwhelming appeal to a cultural value, the reverence for perfect, divine beauty, could overturn everything. For a moment, the courtroom ceased to be a place of law and became a temple, and the judges were not men of reason, but worshippers. Phryne's story was one of cultivated, almost divine beauty. But there was another arena where the male body was sculpted, celebrated, and put on public display, not in a courtroom, but in the stadium. You think of the Olympic Games. Here, the ideals of physical perfection were not just admired, they were the entire point. An athlete's body was a testament to his discipline, his strength, and his virtue. But even in this temple of testosterone and olive oil, being too good, too perfect, could draw the wrong kind of attention. Every 4 years, the Greek world would put aside its endless squabbles and gather at the sanctuary of Olympia to honor Zeus. The games were a religious festival first and an athletic competition second. To compete was an honor, to win was to achieve a kind of mortal immortality. A victorious athlete was not just a sports hero. He was seen as a man blessed by the gods, a living embodiment of that ideal of Kaga, Thea, the fusion of beauty and goodness. His prize was not a gold medal, but a simple wreath woven from the branches of a sacred olive tree. Yet, when he returned to his home city, he would be showered with riches, have statues erected in his honor, and be fed for the rest of his life at public expense. The athletes competed in the nude. This practice, shocking to their Persian rivals and a bit strange even to us, was fundamental to the Greek athletic ideal. It was a display of peak physical condition, a tribute to the beauty of the trained human form. Before competing, athletes would cover their bodies in olive oil, not just for practical reasons, but to make their muscles glisten in the sun, accentuating their physique. The stadium was a living gallery of moving sculptures. The most celebrated athletes became superstars. Men like Milo of Croton, a wrestler who won 6 Olympic titles and was said to have carried a full-grown bull on his shoulders, or the ageness of Narcissus, a champion in both boxing and pancration, a brutal, no-holds-barred combination of wrestling and boxing. Their fame was immense, and so were the statues erected in their honor. These statues were not just portraits, they were idealized forms. A sculptor wouldn't just copy the athlete's body, he would perfect it according to the rigorous mathematical standards of the canon, the so-called golden ratio. The statue was meant to capture not just the man, but the ideal of athletic perfection he represented. This is where the danger crept in. There's the strange story of the ageness. After his death, a magnificent statue of him was erected in his home city of Narcissus. One of his rivals, a man he had defeated many times, was so consumed by jealousy that he would go to the statue every night and whip it, as if to punish the effigy of the man he could never best in life. One night, the heavy bronze statue, perhaps loosened by the repeated abuse, fell over and crushed the jealous man to death. This is where it gets truly bizarre. The town of Narcissus, following a law about inanimate objects that cause death, put the statue on trial. The statue was found guilty of murder and, as punishment, was sentenced to be thrown into the sea. This isn't just a quirky anecdote. It reveals something deep about the Greek mindset. The statue was more than just a piece of bronze. It was imbued with the spirit, the Kalios fame and glory, of the athlete himself. It was a focal point of his power, a power so real that it could attract both obsessive admiration and violent envy, even after death. The line between the man and his idealized image was porous. The question of whether these hyper-idealized statues actually resembled the athletes is a topic of ongoing academic discussion. Some art historians argue they were generic representations of the perfect athlete, with little attempt at true portraiture. Others believe that while idealized, they still captured recognizable features of the individual. For the Greeks, the statue was a better, more permanent version of the man, his fleeting mortal beauty captured and perfected in stone and bronze for eternity. This pursuit of physical perfection could also attract the jealousy of the gods. An athlete who was too successful, who boasted too loudly of his victories, was treading on the same dangerous ground as a woman whose beauty rivaled Aphrodite's. He was exhibiting hubris. There are tales of champions being struck down by illness or misfortune right after a great victory, a divine reminder that all strength and success ultimately come from the gods. To win the olive wreath was to touch the divine, but to think that made you divine was a fatal mistake. The adoring crowd, the celebratory poems, the bronze statue in the town square, they were all a celebration of a perfect moment, a fleeting glimpse of human potential. But it was fleeting, and the gods were always watching, ensuring that no mortal, no matter how strong or beautiful, forgot his place. The public spectacle of the athlete, the politician, and the hetair stands in stark contrast to the world you, as an ordinary, respectable woman, would inhabit. For you, beauty is not a tool for public life. It is a domestic asset, an intensely private and yet highly scrutinized quality that will define the entire course of your existence. Your life is centered around the oikos, the household, and your beauty is both the key to entering a good one and the lock that keeps you inside it. From the moment you are born, your value is being assessed, while a son is a future citizen, a soldier, a contributor to the public life of the polis. The daughter is a future wife and mother. Her primary purpose is to be given in marriage to the citizen of another family, forging alliances and ensuring the continuation of the male lineage. In this context, your beauty is a crucial part of your dowry. It's not just about romantic attraction, it's a signifier of health, good breeding, and a favorable disposition from the gods. A beautiful daughter can secure a more advantageous match for her family, connecting them to greater wealth or higher social standing. You spend your girlhood in the Genesee, the women's quarters of the house, usually located on the upper floor or at the back of the dwelling. This is your world. It's a space of looms, wool baskets, and the quiet hum of domestic activity. You learn to spin, to weave, to manage household slaves, and to be modest and obedient. Your education is entirely practical, aimed at making you a competent mistress of a new oikos. Your contact with the outside world is severely limited. You would not go to the agora by yourself, as you did in the first part of our journey. That was a fantasy, a way for us to explore the city. In reality, a respectable girl or woman would only leave the house for religious festivals or family events, and even then, she would be heavily chaperoned. The ideal was for a bride to be unseen and unheard before her marriage. This seclusion was partly for protection, but it was also a way to preserve the commodity of her beauty and virginity, ensuring its value wasn't diminished by public exposure. The day of your marriage is the most important day of your life. It is less a romantic union and more a business transaction between your father and your future husband. The ceremony is full of rituals. You would dedicate your childhood toys to the goddess Artemis, marking the end of your girlhood. You would wear a special wedding veil, the Kelwaigra, which is deeply symbolic. The moment your husband lifts the veil is the Anaka Lypteria, the unveiling. It's the first time he, and perhaps any man outside your immediate family, has ever seen your face clearly. It's a moment of immense vulnerability and judgment. A strange but telling detail of the wedding is the gift of a quince. The bride was expected to eat a quince before entering the bridal chamber on her wedding night. The fruit, sacred to Aphrodite, was meant to ensure fertility, then give her sweet-smelling breath. It's a small, intimate ritual that underscores the sensory, physical nature of the marital bond she is about to enter. Her body is no longer her own, it belongs to her husband, for the sole purpose of producing legitimate heirs for his oikos. There's a significant debate among historians about the lived reality of Athenian women. The traditional view, based on public texts written by men like orators and philosophers, paints a picture of extreme seclusion and subjugation. However, more recent scholarship, looking at things like vase paintings, private letters, and archaeological evidence from houses, suggests a more nuanced picture. While the ideal was seclusion, the reality for poorer families would have been very different. A woman from a far more craftsman's family would have had to work outside, help in the shop, and generally be much more visible. The strict cloistering was a luxury of the upper classes, a status symbol that proved a man was wealthy enough that his wife didn't need to work. Once married, your life is still confined to the home. You are now the manager of your husband's household. Your beauty, which secured the marriage, is now something to be guarded. Adultery on the part of a wife was a catastrophic crime, not because of love, but because it threw the legitimacy of the male heirs into question. If you weren't faithful, your husband had the legal right to kill your lover on the spot and could divorce you in disgrace. Your beauty, which was once an asset for your father, could now become a source of intense anxiety for your husband. It might attract other men, threatening the integrity of his lineage. Thus, the seclusion continues, not just to protect you, but to protect his legacy from the potential chaos your beauty could unleash. Your home is both your kingdom and your prison, and your face is the jewel that must be kept locked away within it. While your life as a respectable woman is one of seclusion, there is a parallel world where male beauty is not just celebrated, but is a central part of a sophisticated and highly ritualized social scene. This is the world of the symposium, the all-male drinking party. And it's here that the beauty of a particular demographic, the adolescent boy, becomes a prized and complex social currency. Picture a room in a wealthy Athenian home. It's the undrawn, the men's quarters, a space you, as a respectable woman, would never enter. Men, all crowned with wreaths of ivy or myrtle, recline on couches arranged in a U shape. In the center, a large crater, a mixing bowl, is filled with wine, which is always diluted with water. To drink wine undiluted was considered barbaric. The air is thick with the scent of wine, incense, and perfumes. This is the symposium. It's not a wild, drunken brawl, it's a structured event for the Athenian elite to drink, talk, and be entertained. The conversation is the main event. They might discuss philosophy, debate politics, recite poetry, or simply engage in witty banter. But there is another element present, one that is crucial to the atmosphere of the evening: the presence of youth and beauty. Moving among the couches are the serving boys, and these are not just any boys. They are chosen for their grace, their youth, and their good looks. Their presence is part of the aesthetic pleasure of the evening, like the fine pottery or the elegant furniture. More prominent, however, is the role of the eromenos, the beloved. This refers to an adolescent boy who is in a formal mentorship relationship with an older man, the eros, or lover. This institution, which we now call pederasty, was a socially accepted and even idealized part of aristocratic life in Athens and other Greek city-states. It was seen as an educational relationship. The older man, the eros, would guide his younger beloved, the eromenos, in matters of politics, ethics, and social conduct. In return, the boy would provide his youth, beauty, and companionship. The beauty of the eromenos was of a very specific kind. It was the beauty of the nearly man, the youth on the cusp of growing a beard. This fleeting moment, when a boy possessed a lean, athletic physique but still had the softness of youth, was considered the absolute peak of male attractiveness. Face paintings from the period are filled with images depicting this ideal older, bearded men gazing admiringly at smooth-cheeked, athletic youths, often offering them gifts like a rooster or a hare, symbols of virile courtship. A fashionably strange detail is the etiquette surrounding this relationship. It was meant to be a chaste admiration, at least in public theory. The eros was supposed to be in love with the boy's soul, his potential for virtue, with his physical beauty being merely the outward sign of that inner promise. The eromenos, in turn, was not supposed to show any pleasure or desire. He was to be modest and reserved, accepting the older man's courtship as an honor. The relationship was considered noble as long as it remained asymmetrical and educational. If the boy seemed to be enjoying it too much, or if he accepted money, he risked being seen as prostituting himself, which would bring him immense shame and could even threaten his future citizenship rights. The scholarly debate surrounding Greek pederasty is, as you can imagine, immense and highly contentious. Early classicists often ignored it or tried to downplay its physical aspect, presenting it as a pure form of Socratic mentorship. More modern scholars, like Kenneth Dover in his groundbreaking book, Greek Homosexuality, have examined the evidence more frankly, concluding that it often did have a physical component. The debate now often centers on the question of power and consent. Was it a truly educational system, or was it a socially sanctioned system of exploitation, where older, powerful men took advantage of vulnerable youths? The answer is likely complex and varied, with relationships ranging from genuinely affectionate and educational to purely transactional and exploitative. For the beautiful young man at the center of this world, it was a tightrope walk. His looks gave him access to the highest circles of power. A relationship with a prominent eros could launch his career, but it was also fraught with peril. He had to manage the affections of his admirer without seeming too eager. He had to maintain his reputation for modesty while being the center of attention. His beauty was his ticket in, but any misstep could lead to public disgrace, like the respectable girl locked in the Guinea Sea. His value was tied to his appearance and his conduct, both subject to a rigid and unforgiving set of social rules. The symposium, for all its intellectual pretense, was a marketplace of beauty, and the boys were the prized and precarious commodity. In this world so utterly obsessed with physical perfection, the chiseled athlete, the graceful youth, the divine face of Phryne, one of Athens' most famous citizens, stands out as a glaring, intentional contradiction. As you make your way through these mental landscapes of Greek beauty, you inevitably stumble upon the deliberately unbeautiful figure of Socrates. His appearance was as unconventional as his ideas, and his famous ugliness served as a constant, walking critique of his society's superficial values. To picture Socrates, you have to erase the image of a noble, white-bearded philosopher. The ancient sources, including his own students Plato and Xenophon, are quite clear. Socrates was, by all Athenian standards, remarkably ugly. He had a snub nose, wide nostrils, and a stocky, ungraceful build. His eyes bulged out and were set far apart, giving him a look that was often compared to a crab or a adder, the half-man, half-goat companions of the winged god Dionysus. He was famously indifferent to his appearance, often walking barefoot through the agora, his single robe, or turban, rumpled and dirty. In a city where appearance and presentation were everything, Socrates was a deliberate and striking anomaly. He seemed to revel in his own ugliness, using it as a philosophical tool. In Xenophon's Symposium, Socrates engages in a playful beauty contest with a handsome young man named Critobulus. Critobulus is confident, listing his own fine, regular features. Socrates, in response, argues for the superiority of his own face with absurd, comical logic. His bulging eyes, he claims, are better because they can see to the sides. His wide, upturned nostrils are better because they can catch smells from all directions. His thick lips are better for delivering passionate kisses. It's a joke, of course, but it has a serious point. The concept of beauty depends entirely on its fitness for a purpose. He is forcing his audience to question their automatic, aesthetic definition of beauty and to consider a more functional, utilitarian one. This intentional contrast between his outer appearance and his inner wisdom became central to his philosophical identity. His ugliness was a filter. Those who were shallow, who judged by appearances alone, would dismiss him as a strange, unkempt old man and walk away. But those who were willing to look past his satyr-like exterior and engage with his mind would discover the profound wisdom within. Plato uses this image powerfully in his Symposium, where Alcibiades, in a drunken, heartfelt speech, compares Socrates to a Silenus statue. These were common figurines that looked like ugly, comical satyrs on the outside, but when you opened them up, they contained a beautiful, golden image of a god inside. This became the defining metaphor for Socrates, an unattractive outer shell, concealing a divine inner beauty. The weird, little-known fact that adds a layer to this is Socrates' legendary physical toughness. Despite his unathletic appearance, he was an incredibly hardy soldier. He served with distinction as a hoplite, a heavy infantryman in several major battles, including Patide and Delium. He could endure extreme cold and hardship without complaint, and was known for his courage in the heat of battle. This physical resilience complicated the picture. He may not have been beautiful in the graceful, athletic sense, but he possessed a different kind of bodily virtue, endurance, and strength. This challenged the simple Greek equation of kalokogathia. Socrates proved that a man could be ugly on the outside, but possess the highest virtues of courage and wisdom on the inside. The academic debate about Socrates' appearance often revolves around how much of it is historical fact versus philosophical branding. Did Plato and Xenophon exaggerate his ugliness to make their philosophical point more potent, or was he truly as strange-looking as they claimed? Most scholars believe the descriptions are largely accurate, as they are so consistent and specific. The more interesting question is how Socrates himself leveraged his appearance. He weaponized his ugliness, turning it into a trademark, a way to disarm his opponents and force people to confront their own prejudices. It was the ultimate Socratic irony, The ugliest man in Athens spent his life trying to convince his fellow citizens to care for the beauty of their souls. His existence was a constant, low-level irritant to the Athenian establishment. He was a living paradox they couldn't easily categorize. He wasn't an aristocrat, but he mesmerized their sons. He wasn't a politician, but he questioned the foundations of their democracy. He wasn't beautiful, but he spoke of a higher beauty that made their conventional ideals seem shallow. His face was a challenge, forcing everyone who looked at it to make a choice to trust the evidence of their eyes, or to listen to the words coming from his purportedly ugly mouth. Socrates, with his ugly face and beautiful soul, laid the groundwork, but it was his most brilliant student, Plato, who took this idea and built it into a grand, complex philosophical system. As you ponder the paradox of Socrates, you can feel the intellectual ground shifting. You're moving from the marketplace and the myths into the cool, shaded groves of the academy, Plato's school of philosophy. Here, the danger of physical beauty is not just a social or divine threat, it's an intellectual one. It's a distraction, a beautiful illusion that can prevent your soul from ascending to the truth. Plato, through the voice of Socrates in his dialogues, argues that the physical world we perceive with our senses is not the real world. It's a world of shadows, of imperfect copies. The real world is a higher, intelligible realm of pure forms or ideas. There is a form of justice, a form of courage, and, most importantly, a form of beauty itself. This ultimate beauty is perfect, eternal, and unchanging. The beautiful things we see on earth, a handsome face, a stunning sunset, a work of art, are beautiful only because they participate in this universal form of beauty. They are flawed, fleeting reflections of the real thing. This is the core of what becomes known as the ladder of beauty or platonic love, which is beautifully laid out in his dialogue. The Symposium. In the dialogue, a priestess named Diotima explains to a young Socrates that love eros is the driving force that can lead the soul from the lowest rung of this ladder to the highest. It's a journey of intellectual and spiritual ascent. It starts, she explains, with the love of a single, beautiful body. You see a person and are captivated by their physical beauty. This is the most common, most basic form of love. It's not wrong, but it's dangerous if you get stuck there. It's the first rung. The next step is to realize that the beauty in this one person is related to the beauty in all other beautiful bodies. You move from loving one person's form to appreciating physical beauty in general. You see the shared quality of loveliness in many people. This is the second rung. From there, you must learn to value the beauty of the soul as more important than the beauty of the body. You begin to love a person for their mind, their character, their virtues, even if their physical form is plain like Socrates. This is a crucial leap, moving from the physical to the non-physical. This is the third rung. After that, your love expands further. You begin to see the beauty in laws, institutions, and systems of knowledge, the beauty of a well-ordered society, or a logical mathematical proof. You are now appreciating abstract beauty. This is the fourth rung. Finally, after a lifetime of this intellectual training, you may be granted a sudden, breathtaking vision of the form of beauty itself. Diotima describes it as an everlasting loveliness which neither comes nor goes, which neither flowers nor fades. It is pure, unmixed, and absolute. To glimpse this, she says, is the ultimate goal of human life. A strange but important detail within this framework is Plato's deep suspicion of artists, particularly painters and poets. In his most famous work, The Republic, he argues for banishing most artists from his ideal state. Why? Because if a physical object like a bed is already one step removed from the perfect form of the bed, then a painting of that bed is 2 steps removed. Art, for Plato, is a copy of a copy. It's a third-rate illusion that pulls you further away from the truth, not closer to it. Artists who just paint beautiful things are, in his view, dangerous counterfeiters, strengthening our attachment to the shadowy world of appearances. The historical debate here is rich. Is Plato's philosophy a rejection of the traditional Greek love of beauty, or is it its ultimate fulfillment? Some argue that he devalues the physical world and the human body, setting up a dualism that would heavily influence later Christian thought. Others contend that he isn't rejecting beauty, but redefining it, giving it a profound philosophical purpose. He's providing a framework to explain why we are so drawn to beauty, because our souls have a faint, subconscious memory of the perfect forms they knew before they were wrapped in our bodies. Every beautiful thing we see is a little echo of home. This Platonic ladder casts all the stories you've been thinking about in a new light. Helen, Narcissus, Adonis, they were all trapped on the first rung. Their beauty, and the love it inspired, was purely physical. It led not to enlightenment, but to chaos, death, and self-obsession. Plato provides a philosophical diagnosis for their tragedies. The danger of being too pretty in ancient Greece was, for him, the danger of being a distraction so powerful that it could permanently chain a soul to the lowest level of existence, forever preventing it from climbing toward the light of true understanding. Plato's philosophy gives you a mental framework for the why of beauty's danger. But down on the ground, in the artist's workshop or the gymnasium, there was a much more practical and demanding concern: the what. What, exactly, constituted a perfect body? The Greeks were not vague about this. They were obsessed with defining it, measuring it, and codifying it into a set of ruthlessly precise mathematical rules. This ideal, known as the canon, turned the pursuit of beauty into a demanding, and often unattainable, science. This quest for a formula for perfection is most famously associated with a sculptor from the 5th century BCE named Polycleitos. He was not just an artist, he was a theorist. He wrote a treatise, now lost but quoted and referenced by later writers like Helen, which he also called the canon. In this text, he laid out the precise mathematical relationships, the symmetria, that should exist between the different parts of the human body to create a perfectly harmonious and beautiful whole. He then created a bronze statue, also now lost but known through numerous Roman marble copies, to be the physical embodiment of his theory. He called this statue the Dori Ph, or Os, or spear bearer. The Dori Ph, or Os, was the Greek ideal man in bronze. Every part of him was defined in relation to every other part. The head was a specific fraction of the total body height. The width of the shoulders was a set ratio to the hips. The length of the forearm related to the upper arm, which related to the foot, and so on. It was a complex symphony of proportions, creating a figure that looked both incredibly natural and impossibly perfect. He wasn't just a man, he was a mathematical equation brought to life. One of the key innovations of the Dori Ph or Os was its pose, the contrappostu. The figure stands with his weight shifted onto one leg, the other leg relaxed. This causes the hips and shoulders to tilt in opposite directions, creating a subtle S-curve in the torso. This wasn't just an aesthetic choice, it was a philosophical one. The pose perfectly balanced opposing states: tension and relaxation, movement and rest, action and potential. It was the visual representation of the Greek ideals of balance and moderation. Of self rose in me. Living under the shadow of this ideal created a unique kind of pressure. For an athlete, it wasn't enough to be strong, you had to have the right kind of strong body, one that conformed to these aesthetic principles. For a sculptor, it wasn't enough to capture a likeness, you had to improve upon reality, to create a more perfect version of the human form that a mere mortal could never achieve. This canon of proportions became the benchmark against which all real bodies were judged, and almost all of them, inevitably, fell short. Here's a quirky detail that reveals their obsession with measurement. The Greeks used the body itself as a unit of measurement. The term pois meant foot, which was both a body part and a unit of length. A dactylos was a finger, a smaller unit. This habit of measuring the world with their own bodies shows how deeply the human form was embedded in their way of understanding and ordering the cosmos. Their ideal body was, in a sense, the ideal ruler against which the rest of the world was measured. Of course, the ideal body was exclusively male. The female form was not codified with the same mathematical rigor until much later. Praxiteles' Aphrodite of Knidos, which you remember from Fine's story, was revolutionary precisely because it started to apply these principles of idealized beauty to the female nude. But the male form remained the primary standard of perfection for centuries. This reflects the male-centric nature of Greek public life, where the citizen soldier-athlete was the center of the universe. The academic debate today often focuses on the legacy of this canon. Is it the foundation of Western art, a noble quest for harmony and order, or is it the origin of a tyrannical and exclusionary form of body fascism? Critics argue that this single, narrow definition of beauty, athletic, useful, male, and mathematically precise, has cast a long, undamaging shadow, creating unrealistic standards that people have been struggling to live up to for over 2,000 years. The very idea that there is one perfect body type is a Greek invention, and a powerful, enduringly problematic one. So while Plato was urging you to look past the body to the soul, artists like Polykleitos were doing the exact opposite. They were perfecting the body, turning it into a flawless cage, a beautiful trap for the eyes. The pressure wasn't just to be beautiful, it was to be beautiful in the right way. Any deviation from this precise, geometric ideal was a flaw, a falling short, a reminder that the world of flesh and bone could never quite live up to the cold, hard perfection of the mathematical ideal. The intense, philosophical, and artistic obsession with the ideal body that you saw in Athens was not a universal Greek phenomenon. If you were to travel just a couple hundred miles southwest, across the rugged mountains of the Peloponnese, you would arrive in a place with a very different and much more intimidating view on beauty. You would be in Sparta. And in Sparta, the question was not, is it beautiful, but is it useful? Spartan society was a military machine, and every aspect of life was subordinated to the needs of the state. Their aesthetic sense, if you can call it that, was brutally pragmatic. For the Spartans, beauty was synonymous with function, and function meant military effectiveness. A beautiful body was a strong, disciplined, and resilient body, one capable of marching long distances, fighting effectively in a phalanx, and enduring hardship without complaint. There is no room for the soft, contemplative beauty of the Athenian ideal. Spartan beauty was hard, sharp, and honed for war. This philosophy started at birth. When a Spartan baby was born, it was not immediately welcomed into the family. The father would take the infant to a council of elders at a place called the Lesche. The elders would examine the child, not for its delicate features or family resemblance, but for its physical fitness. If the baby was deemed healthy and strong, it was returned to its parents to be raised. If it was found to be weak, sickly, or deformed in any way, it was taken to a nearby chasm at the foot of Mount Aegidos and left to die. This practice of state-sanctioned infanticide is a stark and horrifying illustration of their values. A body that could not serve the state was not considered worth preserving. From the age of 7, a Spartan boy was taken from his family to enter the agoge, the brutal state-run military training program. Here, he was systematically toughened. He was taught to endure hunger, cold, and pain. The boys were kept perpetually underfed to make them resourceful and skilled at stealing food, though they were whipped severely if caught, not for stealing, but for being clumsy enough to get caught. Their training emphasized physical prowess, obedience, and a fanatical devotion to Sparta. A handsome face meant nothing. A perfectly sculpted physique, in the Athenian sense, was irrelevant, unless it could withstand a 30-mile march in full armor. Even Spartan women were expected to be physically formidable, unlike their secluded Athenian counterparts. Spartan girls received a public education and engaged in rigorous athletic training. They ran, wrestled, and threw the javelin and discus, often competing in the nude, just like the boys. The Spartans believed that strong, fit mothers would produce strong, fit sons for the army. A beautiful Spartan woman was not a pale, delicate creature hidden away in a Guinea sea. She was a sunt and muscular woman with an attitude. A famous quote attributed to Gorgo, a Spartan queen, perfectly captures this. When a woman from another city asked her, "Why are you Spartan women the only ones who can rule men?" Gorgo replied, "Because we are also the only ones who give birth to men." Here is a strange detail that highlights their unique culture, their relationship with wealth and luxury, to discourage the accumulation of personal wealth, which they saw as a corrupting influence. The legendary Spartan lawgiver Lycurgus supposedly implemented a currency made of iron. The coins were large, heavy, and had very little value, making it nearly impossible to hoard wealth or conduct large-scale commerce. This extended to their personal appearance. Spartans were expected to be austere. They wore simple, coarse red cloaks, the foe in IKs both as a uniform and as a way to hide the sight of blood in battle. Personal vanity, fine jewelry, and elaborate hairstyles were all seen as signs of softness and decadence. The academic debate about Sparta is often a battle between the Spartan mirage and reality. For centuries, philosophers like Plato and Xenophon looked to Sparta as a model of a well-ordered, disciplined society, free from the chaos and frivolity of Athens. They admired its stability and its focus on collective good over individual ambition. This idealized view is the Spartan mirage. Modern historians, however, work to peel back this layer of propaganda and see the brutal reality. They question the historical accuracy of some of the more extreme stories, like the mass infanticide, and analyze the immense cruelty and oppression required to maintain such a rigid system, particularly towards the massive enslaved population known as the Helots. In Sparta, the danger of being too pretty in the Athenian sense was not that you would attract a god's jealousy, but that you would be seen as soft, vain, and useless to the state. Your value was measured in your physical output, your contribution to the collective. Beauty was not an abstract ideal to be contemplated. It was a practical quality to be cultivated on the training ground and proven on the battlefield. It was the terrifying beauty of a perfectly sharpened spear. You've seen the Athenian obsession with idealized forms, the philosophical ladders, and the harsh pragmatism of the Spartans. These are two powerful, often conflicting, currents in the Greek understanding of beauty, that they both flow toward a single, ultimate ideal. It's a concept you've touched on before, a word that encapsulates the absolute pinnacle of human aspiration in the Greek world, kalokagathia. The word itself is a fusion of two other Greek words, kalos, which means beautiful or handsome, fine, and agathos, which means good or virtuous, noble. Put them together and you get the beautiful and the good, or more fluidly, nobility of spirit and beauty of form. This wasn't just a casual compliment, it was the highest possible praise. To be described as a man possessing kalokagathia was to be seen as the complete package, the perfect fusion of outer excellence and inner virtue. This ideal resolves the tension you saw in the figure of Socrates. Socrates had the agathos, the good in spades, but he conspicuously lacked the kalos, the beautiful. Alcibiades, on the other hand, was overflowing with kalos, but his actions often showed a severe deficit of agathos. The tragic flaw in both of these men, from the perspective of the ideal, was their imbalance. They were incomplete. The true goal was to possess both. The concept was deeply aristocratic in its origins. In the early days of Greece, it was simply assumed that a nobleman, a good family, would naturally be both handsome and virtuous. His fine appearance was a sign of his good breeding, and his good breeding guaranteed his moral character. The two were seen as inextricably linked, a birthright of the elite, as you move into the democratic age of Athens. However, the idea becomes more democratized, at least in theory. It becomes an ideal that any citizen could aspire to, not through birth, but through education and self-discipline. The gymnasium was the laboratory of kalokagathia. It was here that a young man would train his body to achieve the kalos part of the equation, sculpting his physique through wrestling, running, and discus throwing. But the gymnasium was not just a sports center. It was also a place for intellectual and moral education. Philosophers would gather there, engaging the young men in discussions about ethics, politics, and the nature of virtue. The goal was to train the mind and the body in tandem, to produce a citizen who was not just a beautiful athlete or a brilliant thinker, but both at once. One of the more peculiar manifestations of this ideal is in the Greek attitude toward music. For the Greeks, and particularly for thinkers like Plato, music was not just entertainment. It was a powerful tool for shaping character. They believed that different musical modes, different scales and harmonies had a direct effect on the soul. The Dorian mode, for instance, was seen as martial, courageous, and orderly, and was therefore good for training the good part of a young man. Other modes, like the Lydian, were considered soft, lamenting, and decadent, and were believed to corrupt the soul. The education of a truly beautiful and good man therefore included a very careful and restricted musical diet to ensure his inner harmony matched his outer poise. The historical debate around kalokagathia often centers on its exclusivity. Was it truly a democratized ideal, or did it remain an aristocratic concept designed to flatter the elite and keep others in their place? Critics argue that it's a form of class-based moralizing, since only the wealthy had the leisure time to spend all day at the gymnasium, perfecting their bodies and debating philosophy. The ideal of kalokagathia was, in practice, only attainable for the rich. It created a self-reinforcing loop. The elite are beautiful and good, and if you are not beautiful and good, it's because you are not one of the elite. It's a classic case of the winners writing the rules of the game in a way that ensures they keep winning. Despite its elitist roots, the ideal of kalokagathia represents the ultimate Greek solution to the problem of beauty. It attempts to tame beauty's dangerous, chaotic power by tethering it to morality. Beauty alone, as you've seen in so many stories, is a volatile and untrustworthy force. It can lead to vanity, Narcissus, chaos, Helen, or betrayal, Alcibiades. But beauty fused with goodness, that was something else entirely. That was order, harmony, and perfection. It was the Greek ideal of a human being firing on all cylinders, physically, intellectually, and morally. It was the target they were all aiming for, even if, as the myths and histories show, very few ever truly hit the mark. The ideal of kalokagathia was the goal, the shining aspiration. But the Greeks were also realists, and they knew that life was more often a story of failure than of success. The place where they explored this tragic gap between the ideal and the reality was the theater. As you imagine yourself sitting on the stone tiers of the theater of Dionysus, carved into the southern slope of the Acropolis, you can see how beauty and ugliness become powerful dramatic signals, signposts pointing directly to a character's inescapable fate. The annual festival of the Dionysia was a major civic and religious event in Athens. For several days, the entire city would shut down to watch a series of plays, mostly tragedies. These were not simple entertainments. They were deep, communal explorations of the most difficult questions of human existence, the nature of fate, the relationship between gods and mortals, and the consequences of human pride. In this context, a character's physical appearance was often a form of foreshadowing. When a character is introduced as exceptionally beautiful, it's rarely just a descriptive detail. It's a dramatic device. The audience, steeped in the myths you've been contemplating, would immediately feel a sense of unease. A character like Hippolytus, the beautiful, chaste son of Theseus who worships only the Virgin goddess Artemis, is a prime example. His absolute devotion to purity and his stunning good looks make him an object of Aphrodite's wrath. The audience knows from the moment he walks on stage that his beauty is a provocation, a tragic flaw that will lead directly to his gruesome end. Dragged to death by his own horses, his beauty isn't a blessing, it's the engine of his tragedy. Conversely, physical ugliness or deformity was often a sign of a character's inner turmoil or a mark of some past tragedy. The most famous example, of course, is Oedipus. His name itself, Oedipus, means swollen foot. He was given this name because his parents, King Laius and Queen Jocasta, in an attempt to thwart a prophecy that he would kill his father and marry his mother, pierced his ankles and left him to die on a mountainside. He survived, but with a permanent limp. This physical mark, his ugly walk, is a constant, visible reminder of the fate he has been trying to outrun his entire life. When he finally learns the horrifying truth that he has, in fact, fulfilled the prophecy, his self-inflicted punishment is to blind himself, trading one physical disfigurement for another, and making his outer state finally match his inner pollution and despair. A particularly strange and vivid detail of Greek theater is the use of masks. The actors, all of whom were male, wore large, stylized masks that covered their entire heads. These masks had exaggerated features that could be seen even from the highest rows of the massive, open-air theater. This meant that an actor couldn't rely on subtle facial expressions. The character's entire emotional state and moral alignment were communicated through the fixed expression of the mask, the tone of the actor's voice, and his gestures. A handsome, noble mask immediately signaled a heroic character. A grotesque or twisted mask signaled a villain, a messenger of bad news, or a character in distress. The mask literally set a character's beauty or ugliness in stone, predetermining the audience's perception of them before they even spoke a word. The academic debate about the function of tragedy is as old as the plays themselves. Aristotle, in his Poetics, famously argued that the purpose of tragedy is to evoke pity and fear in the audience, leading to a kind of emotional cleansing or purgation known as catharsis. By watching the terrible downfall of a great and beautiful hero, the audience could process their own anxieties about fate and human suffering in a controlled environment. Modern scholars often add a political dimension, arguing that these plays were also a way for the Athenian democracy to reflect on its own values and dangers. The tragic hero, often a king from the mythical past, served as a cautionary tale against the kind of pride and overreach hubris that could destroy a city as easily as it could an individual. In the world of tragedy, beauty is rarely a source of lasting happiness. It is a target for divine jealousy, a catalyst for violence, or a symbol of a temporary, fragile good that is about to be brutally extinguished. The beautiful hero is like a perfect, gleaming vase. The drama of the play is not in admiring the vase, but in the tense, terrifying anticipation of its inevitable shattering. The theater was the place where the Greeks confronted the dark side of their own aesthetic obsession, acknowledging that the same beauty they celebrated in the gymnasium and the symposium was, more often than not, a prelude to a scream. The age of the city-state, of the tragic festivals and the intense philosophical debates in the agora, was coming to an end. A new power was rising in the north, in Macedon, and with it came a new kind of leader, one who would take the Greek obsession with beauty and heroism and weaponize it on a global scale. This was Alexander the Great, and the story of his image is a masterclass in propaganda, a deliberate fusion of mortal beauty and divine myth to create a persona destined for conquest. Alexander was, by all contemporary accounts, a genuinely handsome man. Writers like Plutarch describe him as having a fair complexion, a ruddy tinge in his face, and a melting, liquid gaze. But his most famous and distinct feature was the way he held his head, tilted slightly upwards and to one side. He also was said to have a magnificent, lion-like mane of hair. These were not just random physical quirks. In the hands of his official court sculptor, Lysippos. These features were transformed into an iconic, immediately recognizable brand. Lysippos was to Alexander what Polykleitos was to the classical ideal. Alexander decreed that only Lysippos was permitted to create sculpted portraits of him. This was a shrewd move, ensuring absolute control over his public image. Lysippos broke with the serene, emotional perfection of the earlier Dori Phros style. His portraits of Alexander are dynamic and emotional. They capture the upward gaze, the slightly parted lips, and the chiseled, lion-like hair. This wasn't just a man, this was a hero. The pose evoked pathos and longing pathos, a sense of yearning for things beyond the mortal realm. The leonine hair was a direct and deliberate reference to Heracles Hercules, the greatest of the Greek heroes, from whom Alexander's family claimed descent. Every statue of Alexander was a piece of political advertising that said, "I am not just your king, I am the new Heracles." But he didn't stop at Heracles. After conquering Egypt, Alexander was declared a son of the god Ammon, who was identified with the Greek king of the gods, Zeus. This divine parentage became a key part of his persona. In some sculptures and coins, he is depicted with the ram's horns of Ammon subtly mixed into his curly hair. This was a brilliant piece of cross-cultural branding, appealing to his new Egyptian subjects while reinforcing his superhuman status for his Greek soldiers. One of the more peculiar ways this image was disseminated was through coinage. After his conquests, Alexander's face, or the image of Heracles with his features, began to appear on coins across his vast empire. From Greece to the borders of India, this was a revolutionary act. Before Alexander, Greek coins typically featured the image of a god or a city's sacred symbol. Putting the face of a living ruler on a coin was a move associated with tyrants or Near Eastern despots, but Alexander did it anyway. Every time a merchant made a transaction, every time a soldier was paid, they were holding a small piece of propaganda, a metal disc that equated their ruler with the gods and heroes of myth. The academic debate surrounding Alexander's deification is lively. Did he genuinely believe he was a god, or was he a brilliant and cynical politician who understood that in order to rule over a diverse, multicultural empire, he needed to present himself as something more than a mere Macedonian king? Most historians lean toward the latter interpretation. They argue that Alexander adopted different religious personas for different audiences. In Egypt, he was the son of Ammon. To the Persians, he adopted the trappings of their great king. To his Greek soldiers, he was a new Achilles, the ultimate warrior hero from the Trojan War. He famously slept with a copy of the Iliad under his pillow. His image was fluid, adaptable, and always calculated for maximum political effect. His beauty and charisma were central to this project. His soldiers were fanatically loyal to him, not just because he was a brilliant general, but because they believed he was touched by the divine. They saw his youthful energy, his reckless courage in battle, and his heroic appearance, and they were convinced they were following a man of destiny. His beauty was not a source of danger in the old Greek sense. It was his primary weapon. It unified his army, intimidated his enemies, and legitimized his rule over a vast territory. With Alexander, the Greek ideal of beauty breaks out of the city-state and goes on a world tour. It's no longer just a philosophical concept or a local social currency. It has become an instrument of empire, a tool for shaping a new global order. The handsome face of the young king, endlessly reproduced in statues and on coins, became the face of a new era, an era where the lines between man, hero, and god were not just blurred, but deliberately unmasterfully erased. Alexander's empire, forged by the force of his personality and the power of his image, shattered almost as soon as he died. But the culture he had spread, a Greek-influenced civilization known as Hellenism, did not. And the heirs to this culture, the next great superpower to rise in the Mediterranean, were watching and learning. You now feel the timeline shift forward again. The air is still Mediterranean, but the language you hear is changing from Greek to Latin. You are in Rome, and the Romans have their own, very different, take on the Greek gift of beauty. The Romans were, at their core, a deeply practical and pragmatic people. They were engineers, lawyers, and soldiers. When they first encountered the art and philosophy of Greece, they were like a brilliant but coarse student meeting a sophisticated but decadent teacher. They were in awe of Greek culture, but also slightly suspicious of its excesses. They admired Greek beauty, but they wanted to make it useful, to put it to work in the service of the Roman state and Roman ambition. You can see this clearly in their approach to portraiture. When you look at a classical Greek statue like the Dori Phros, you see an idealized, flawless youth. When you look at a portrait bust of a Roman senator from the Republican era, you see something startlingly different. You see every wrinkle, every wart, every sagging jowl. This style is called verism, from the Latin word virus, meaning true. The Romans, particularly the old aristocratic families, did not want to be depicted as beautiful in the Greek sense. They wanted to be depicted as they were old, experienced, and serious. A wrinkled brow was not a flaw, it was a sign of a lifetime spent in service to the Republic. A stern, unsmiling mouth was not ugly, it was a mark of gravitas, that quintessential Roman virtue of dignity, seriousness, and authority. Their ugliness was a badge of honor. However, as Rome transitioned from a republic to an empire, things began to change. The first emperor, Augustus, initiated a dramatic shift in artistic style. He had lived through the bloody civil wars that destroyed the republic and wanted to present his new reign as a golden age of peace and prosperity, a return to classical values. So he consciously rejected the veristic style of his ancestors and adopted the idealized, eternally youthful style of classical Greece. Statues of Augustus, made throughout his long life, almost never show him aging. He is forever depicted as a handsome, calm, and god-like figure, a Roman version of the Doi Phros. His beauty was a political statement. His eternal youth symbolized the eternal stability of the new Roman Empire. This is where you see the Roman genius for adaptation. They took the Greek aesthetic, but repurposed it for their own political ends. For a Roman emperor, beauty wasn't about philosophical forms or athletic prowess. It was about power. An emperor's portrait, sent out across the vast empire, had to communicate his authority and his right to rule. Some emperors, like Augustus, did this through idealized beauty. Others, like Vespasian, went back to the old veristic style to present themselves as no-nonsense, traditional military men, in contrast to the decadent excesses of their predecessors like Nero. A weirdly Roman detail is their fascination with collecting. Wealthy Romans became obsessive collectors of original Greek statues, or more often, high-quality Roman copies. A villa wasn't complete without a sculpture garden filled with replicas of Praxiteles as Aphrodite or Myron's discus thrower. This wasn't just about appreciating art. It was a status symbol. Owning Greek art was a way to show that you were a sophisticated, cultured individual, that you were connected to the glorious tradition of the Greeks. It was a form of cultural appropriation, a way for the new masters of the world to claim the cultural heritage of the people they had conquered. The scholarly debate often centers on the question of originality. For a long time, Roman art was seen as merely a derivative, less creative copy of Greek art. More recent scholarship, however, has challenged this view, arguing that the Romans were not just copying, they were selecting, adapting, and transforming Greek models to fit their own unique cultural and political needs. The choice to copy a particular Greek style was itself a creative and meaningful act. They were in a constant dialogue with their Greek predecessors, sometimes embracing their ideals, sometimes rejecting them, but always using them to define what it meant to be Roman. In Rome, the danger of being too pretty was less about divine jealousy and more about political perception. An emperor who seemed too focused on his own beauty like Nero with his artistic pretensions, could be seen as effeminate, decadent, and un-Roman. Beauty had to have a purpose. It had to project authority, legitimacy, or tradition. The Romans stripped Greek beauty of much of its philosophical baggage and turned it into a powerful, but highly practical, tool in the imperial propaganda machine. It was beauty with a job to do. As our journey through time begins to slow, bringing you closer to the present, you find yourself in a different kind of space. It's not a city street, a temple, or a battlefield. You are in a modern museum. The air is cool and still. The lighting is precise. All around you, standing on pedestals in silent, solemn rows, are the survivors of this long and complicated story, the Greek and Roman statues. And as you look at them, you realize you're witnessing one of the most beautiful and persistent misunderstandings in the history of art. You see the Dori Phros, the Aphrodite of Caius, the portraits of Augustus. They are all a uniform, brilliant white. The marble gleams under the gallery lights, its surface pure, smooth, and monochromatic. For centuries, this is what the West has believed classical antiquity looked like. This aesthetic, championed during the Renaissance and later codified by the influential 18th century art historian Johann Joachim Winckelmann, is known as neoclassicist. It celebrated what were believed to be the core values of Greek art: noble simplicity, quiet grandeur, and, above all, the purity of white marble. This vision of a serene, colorless classical world has shaped our government buildings, our monuments, and our very idea of classical beauty. But it's wrong. If you could travel back to the ancient Agora, you would be in for a shock. The temples on the Acropolis were not stark white. They were painted in a riot of what we might consider garish colors: bright reds, deep blues, vibrant greens, and the statues themselves were not pale and ghostly. They were polychromatic, painted all over. Imagine that spear bearer again. His skin would have been painted a deep, sunt and bronze. His hair would be a rich brown, his lips a dark red, his eyes inlaid with colored glass and stone to make them look alive. The drapery on a female statue wouldn't be a study in pure form. It would be decorated with intricate, colorful patterns, maybe even gilded with gold leaf. The world of ancient sculpture was not a serene, minimalist dreamscape. It was vibrant, colorful, and startlingly lifelike. To our modern eyes, it might even look a little tacky. This is a strange and almost uncomfortable truth for many people. We've been conditioned for centuries to associate the white marble with purity, elegance, and high art. The idea of a painted Lady Aphrodite can feel like a desecration. The scientific evidence, however, is now overwhelming. Using techniques like ultraviolet and infrared spectroscopy, archaeologists and conservators can detect microscopic traces of pigment that are invisible to the naked eye. They can reconstruct the original color schemes, and the results are stunning. The debate in the academic and museum worlds is now a heated one. What do we do with this knowledge? Should we continue to display the statues in their noble white form, preserving the neoclassical tradition that has been so influential, or should we try to show the public what they really looked like, creating full-color replicas to challenge our collective misunderstanding? Some museums had started to experiment with this, projecting colored lights onto statues or displaying painted plaster casts next to the originals. The results are often controversial, sparking debates about authenticity, aesthetics, and historical accuracy. It forces us to confront our own biases about what good taste looks like. This great white lie of classical sculpture has had a profound impact on the legacy of Greek beauty. It has filtered our perception, stripping away the lively, human messiness of the ancient world and replacing it with something more abstract, more philosophical, more Platonic. The white statues feel like the physical embodiment of Plato's forms, pure, ideal, and removed from the grubby reality of everyday life. In a way, the accidental stripping of their color over the centuries has made the statues conform to a philosophy that was written when they were still painted. So as you stand in this quiet gallery, you are looking at ghosts. They are beautiful, powerful, and deeply moving, but they are also the product of a long history of decay, discovery, and deliberate misinterpretation. The danger of their beauty now is a new one. It's the danger of falling in love with a myth, of preferring the elegant, clean simplicity of the misunderstanding to the vibrant, colorful, and much more complicated truth. The pure white of the marble is, in itself, a veil, just as obscuring as the one a Greek bride wore on her wedding day, hiding the true face of the past. We've walked a long way together tonight, from the sun-drenched streets of Athens to the bloody battlefields of Troy, from the philosopher's garden to the emperor's court, and finally to the quiet, sterile halls of a modern museum. We've seen beauty as a divine gift, a political tool, a philosophical concept, and a terrible curse. And now, as we stand here at the end of our journey, we return to the question that started it all. Why was being too pretty so dangerous in ancient Greece? The answer, you now realize, is not a single, simple thing. It's a complex tapestry woven from many different threads. The first thread is theology. In a world where the gods were powerful, vain, and terrifyingly human in their jealousies, extraordinary beauty was a form of hubris waiting to happen. It was a direct challenge to the divine monopoly on perfection. To be as beautiful as a god was to invite a swift and often brutal cosmic audit. The gods were the ultimate source of beauty, and they did not appreciate competition. The second thread is social order. In the rigid, patriarchal society of Athens, female beauty was a disruptive force that needed to be controlled. It was a valuable commodity to be managed by fathers and husbands, locked away in the home to ensure the legitimacy of the male bloodline. A woman's public beauty, like Helen's or Phryne's, was seen as chaotic and threatening to the stability of the city-state. In Sparta, beauty was dangerous if it wasn't functional for the military. In the Symposium, a boy's beauty was a tightrope walk over a pit of social ruin. In every context, beauty was a power that had to be contained by strict social rules. The third thread is philosophy. For thinkers like Plato, physical beauty was the lowest strung on the ladder of enlightenment. It was a potential trap for the soul, a beautiful illusion that could chain you to the world of shadows and prevent you from seeking higher, intellectual truths. The danger here was not social chaos, but spiritual stagnation. To be captivated by a pretty face was to fail, the first and most important test of the philosophical life. And the final thread is human nature itself. The Greeks, perhaps more than any culture before or since, understood the dark side of admiration. They knew that to be seen is to be judged. They knew that envy follows praise as surely as a shadow follows a man. They knew that love and obsession are two sides of the same coin, and that extraordinary beauty could inspire both the poet's verse and the assassin's blade. Stories like those of Narcissus or the rival of the Whiteness are not about gods, they are about the dangerous, destructive passions that beauty can ignite within the human heart. A strange, final detail to consider is the Greek concept of pharmakon. This one word can mean both remedy and poison. It can be a healing drug or a deadly toxin. Beauty, in the ancient Greek world, was the ultimate pharmakon. It could elevate you to the status of a hero or condemn you to the fate of a monster. It could win you a kingdom or get you exiled from your home. It could be the key to a philosopher's argument for the immortality of the soul, or the reason a goddess would demand your destruction. It was never neutral. It was always potent, always active, and always dangerous. The academic world will, of course, continue to debate these ideas forever. They will argue about the historical accuracy of the myths, the social realities of women, and the precise meaning of philosophical texts. That is their job. But for you, as you've walked through this world, the feeling is more visceral than academic. You felt the weight of the stairs, the chill of a god's potential anger, the pressure of a perfect, mathematical ideal. The gift of beauty, you now understand, always came with a price tag attached, and the currency was oft unpaid in tragedy. It was a temporary loan from the gods, and the interest rates were astronomical. To be too beautiful was to be too visible in a world where visibility meant vulnerability to the envy of your neighbors, the whims of the powerful, and the terrible, insecure vanity of the gods themselves. And so, the journey ends. The echoes of these ancient stories begin to fade, mingling with the soft, ambient hum of your room. The sharp edges of the marble and the bright glare of the Aegean suns soften and dissolve, replaced by a gentle, welcoming darkness. You can feel the weight of the day, the weight of these stories, settling comfortably, guiding you down into a deeper state of relaxation. The concerns of gods and mortals, of beauty and danger, are no longer yours to carry. They are just whispers now, like the rustling of olive leaves in a warm, distant breeze. Let go of the timeline. Let go of the names and the places. They have served their purpose. All that remains is the gentle cadence of the telling, the rhythm that now matches your own slow, steady breathing. You are drifting on a quiet sea, the same sea that birthed Aphrodite, but it is calm now, its surface like dark, polished glass, reflecting a sky with no angry gods, only the soft, pinpricks of distant, silent stars. Each breath you take is a gentle wave, carrying you further from the shore of Whiteness, deeper into the peaceful currents of sleep. There are no more trials to witness, no more tragedies to mourn. There is only this quiet, this stillness, this slow and effortless descent into the soft, welcoming landscape of your own dreams. The end of the article. Good night.